music. I have it on Classic FM nearly all the time. And if it gets a bit too modern for me, I change over to news radio and catch up on what's really making me aggro in the world. But otherwise, yes. Anyway, hello, it's nice to be back in Roseville, which is where I used to live until we moved to Southern Highlands, just down the hill from here. And the Roseville Club was where we spent quite a few evenings of our lives in the 7 years that we lived here. Yeah, why Friends Matters is it's inspirational listening to people like Janine, and I'd like to particularly commend this branch. It's awkward picking out individual names because you end up leaving people out, but these are the people that I know about. I'm looking at Diana now. She's one that I've worked with for how long? 10 years? Yeah, it'd be about 10 years, because she and I swapped roles, well, not swapped roles, she took over as assistant editor, doing a far better job than I ever did. And well, you do a superb job compiling all these articles for Update. They are brilliant, and I can't say enough about those, Diana. Janine, of course, but the first person I knew in the Northern Suburbs branch, before the branch existed, she's lurking in the back there, Margaret Kitson. And I'd like to pay a particular tribute to Margaret, because I found her 2 years after I started being MEMSEC, working on an Access database in those days, and it was, we'll say it's computer-based, but it was pretty, fairly manual in those days. And probably about 2009, I think, that I first met you, and I asked if you would help with all, and you're still doing it to this day, all the mail-outs that go out under Margaret's careful watch. You can say that in one sentence, but it's quite a lot of time and effort that she has done diligently for ABC Friends, and it's that solid support that the Friends gives to our organisation, one, and therefore by default to the ABC, that really matters. So big hats off to Margaret. Jenny Foster, I look out for her pithy letters in the SMH all the time. Lindsay, who took over from Janine when she was politically orientated. Fabulous work. But the first person that started this whole gig off for the whole of New South Wales, Corinne, with her husband Bassie, and 1976. So we go back a long way. That's 40-something years. I can't do the sums. You can all do that. And Corinne's been a solid stalwart of ABC Friends, or Friends of the ABC as it was then known, for all this time, and is still doing things to this day with the latest Music Blast. So look, I know I'm skipping a few people out, and I know, meeting you, Bev and John, for the protest down in Canberra. So I just want to pay a real tribute to this branch for being very active and just fantastic. I've got no chance in the time that I've got available to talk about all the various people that I've got to know around National. We didn't exist as National, as you would know, until the end of 2016. But as a consequence of that, we've all got to know each other, sure, by Zoom, and that's great. Sometimes face-to-face, it's even better. And phenomenal people that have done a lot of work. Something that I can say today that's new as of this week, and that is something I'm really thrilled to hear about, that Victoria has finally joined our national database. Oh. Yay! So we are truly a national organisation in every sense of the word now, and there's been a lot of behind the scenes discussions going on, and I'm absolutely thrilled that Michael Henry and all his team we're all one big happy family now, and that really speaks volumes for our organisation, I believe. So I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled about that. And then, of course, after we formed into a national organisation in 2017 was when the ABC Alumni was formed, because of all the ghastly cuts to the ABC and all the intrusion into the board. And that has empowered us too, because as you know, as Janine mentioned, there's Helen Grasswell's speech up at Central Coast. We are fully interactive with the alumni now, and they're in a sense part and parcel of our organisation as much as we are with them, but they've got the famous names that everybody can relate to, so that's really special. My background in with ABC Friends goes back to 1996, where we were living in Jakarta, and I couldn't go home to Brisbane at the time because our house was rented out, so we went home to New Zealand to see all the family and stay with them, and David joined us later. He was working, he only get 3 weeks off. And we stopped off in Sydney, and where do you go when you stop off in Sydney? You can't now, but you could then. It was the QVB, and upstairs to the ABC shop, and I could leave my children sitting on the floor reading all the books there, and then bought them, I didn't do the wrong thing there. But dashed around and did used the ABC shop as a babysitter, and then on the checkout and paying for everything, there was the form to join Friends of the ABC New South Wales. So I did. That was 96. And in 2007, when we were living back in Sydney again, down the hill, as I say, in Roseville, ended up in the Update magazine. Chris Cartledge advertised the membership secretary role, so I took that on. And he trained me, and he was really diligent, fantastic, what a great guy. And he was down the Illawarra. And then, so I did that for several years and then handed over to Gail Davies. And then Gail and I swapped, you'd all know Gail, I think. And Gail and I swapped, and she did MEMSEC and I did secretary. And it was, I think, about the time that I became the secretary, and I was writing the odd article for Update as well at the time, because I'd become proofreader and all that sort of thing. I really started to get to know some of our members quite well. And I realised the significance of just what Janine's been saying prior to this, the importance of us being out there and talking to we're the coalface. In the branches, we're at the coalface. We talk to the new people. Within the organisation, we're talking at the esoteric levels, the ABC, chatting with David Anderson or whoever it might be. But we're the ones that are out there talking to strangers or acquaintances and persuading. Every conversation I have would be of I was just watching something the other night, must have been on the ABC, because I only watch ABC and SBS, and it's always deliberately brought into the conversation somehow, always. And you probably all do the same thing. And that gets its own energy. It's fantastic. So that's something I do. And also, at the time, the secretary time was when Janine put her head above the parapet and intimated she thought we probably should have a branch. And I thought, yes, because I wanted one in the Southern Highlands and didn't have the time and the energy to do it. So when she put her hand above the parapet, well, that was it. The Doherty Centre was booked by Diana, and Jason Lowe was involved, and Janine got in, and we got the act together. And it was a bit of from my perspective as Secretary of New South Wales, it was a bit of a shambles, but I kept trying. I sent out the email blasts, and we were going okay. Anyway, we pulled it all together, and Janine did the advertising, and Diana did a host of work. I can't remember what you did, but I know it was an awful lot. And Gail too, I think. So, starting that, the room that was booked was cleverly chosen to be suitable for about 60 people, maybe, and it was a weekend. Most of you were probably there. It was the long weekend. There was a footy final on. Don't ask me what, because I'm not interested. But anyway, so we didn't think we'd get very many people. And the room filled, and we ended up with exactly 100 people. I was so impressed.
And despite being upstairs, but we didn't know.
No, stairs and everything, exactly right. But then we had the great guest speaker of Jonathan Holmes, if you recall. And to this day, I still remember his question to us all. Who of you still watches live TV? And every hand in the room went up, and he was floored by that. So there's an awful lot of us, I still do. I can't be bothered, I'll catch up on IView if I really need to, but mostly I'll let that one go through to the keeper. Anyway, so that I still remember that question and his reaction to us all saying we all watch live. So from that, and then a lady in Southern Highlands put her hand up and wanted to start the Southern Highlands branch, and there was also Western Suburbs wanted to get started. I developed a bit of a process, talking about venue, advertising, posters, flyers, agenda for the meeting, and all that the sorts of things you do as a secretary. So I finished it and finally sent it off to Bruce Stevenson for next week's thing that he's having the week after, whenever it is. In September, he's having that branches assistance program. It's a Zoom, I think. So I did all of that, which was just great. I finally got my act together and did a process for starting new branches. So while I was secretary, I helped with the founding of 5 branches, and I'm actually really chuffed about that, because as I say, I really believe the branches are at the coalface. The people that are represented here in this room are so true all across the country, and the more active we are, the more effective we are. I helped with the other thing too, and that makes friends matter, is the platform that Chris Cartledge evaluated, there were 3 or 4 he looked, well, 2 or 3 I think he evaluated, and our software platform, as you may know, is Nation Builder, and he took a long time evaluating that with a couple of other people. But that's given us a very current and very optimal, I should say an optimal platform for the benefit of our promotions and who we are and what we're on about. So, and I spent, I think it was close on 5 months of my life reviewing that after post-implementation review, which was quite a challenge. It was hours and hours and weeks of effort to be sure that we having instituted it, and that was partly as a means to encourage our southern state people to join us as they now have, which is fantastic. So I was really thrilled to do that. The other thing that we did, of course, was the protest down in Canberra that Janine and our branch joined together with, and also, of course, the Canberra branch, or the ACT branch, I should probably say. And it was small, but it was effective. You know, I think it was well worth us doing that, and I'm so glad that it was initiated by the Northern Suburbs branch. The other thing it did not long after the post-implementation review of Nation Builder was Margaret Reynolds, when she was our then president, wondered if I was able to go to the Local Government Association conference in Canberra. So I did. One of our key people, and the purpose of that was to do with transmission of the ABC, and for that matter SBS, especially in television. And that's about the cost of transmission. Some of you may have been on the Zoom that I think was run by the ABC alumni, and David Anderson was the guest. Did some of you hear and see that one? It's about 2 years ago, I think, 2021 I think, and I heard from, being the secretary at the time, I might have been 20 now, I think back about it, somebody had heard about ABC Friends who lives in Goulburn, that's only 40 minutes south of where I live, and they contacted us, and therefore me, quite by chance I was the one that got that, and they said, we don't have any television, and 500 and odd houses on the eastern side of Goulburn don't have any television with ABC or SBS, and we haven't had for the last 2 months. Yeah. So anyway, I pursued it as best I could, asked questions and contacted some of the friends down there and found out the details. It's just because Friends exist that was something able to happen. So the people of the Eastern Goulburn area had approached their council and said, why aren't the transmission towers working? And I don't know about you, but until then I hadn't particularly realised it's quite a complex process, all the transmission around the country, and it comes in many and varied forms. And obviously digitisation is a whole new other discussion, but this was analogue, or whatever you call it, but anyway, not digital. And they didn't have the transmission. And they wanted it, so I followed up with that, and I was able to get people in touch with each other, and I can't remember exactly what, oh I know, that's right, it was Helen. I thought the alumni existed, so I think I rang Helen to ask her what would be best. She said, can you write that all out, and I did in careful dot point form in chronological order, sent it off to her, and she said, you mind if I forward that on to David Anderson? I said, oh, that'd be great. So she did. And within 2 weeks, they were back on the air. So I'm just saying, because we existed, there was a venue, an avenue for people to get through. So it was just a little thing. I accidentally was the one in the loop. I'm really pleased. And I'm back on the air. But that's what I was saying about the Zoom with David Anderson. I asked him, you were able to send a question in advance, and I asked him especially in advance, how did that get paid for? Did the ABC do it, and how did it get paid for? Because, as I say, there are many and varied ways that the transmissions occur around the country, and some of it's paid for by the local government, which is why I was saying it's the LGA conference. And he said, yes, we did. And their budget is 1.1 billion or whatever, it doesn't matter the exact number, but a significant proportion of that comes out first from the Department of Comms to pay for transmission. So if there's any repairs that have to be done, that would go to, you'd think the contractor that got all that money, or contractors around the country, would be doing it. But no, they've already been paid. So So the ABC had to dig into its, and that's the question I asked Anderson. The ABC had to dig into its budget, operating budget, to pay for the repairs. So that means it can't do, half a program somewhere. Do you know what I mean? That's the sad bit about that. But equally, they got back on the air, but I was really... So I went to the LGA conference and handed out what Sue Pinnock in South Australia, used to be the president there, and she knows a chap from, I think, WA, who's quite a smart chappie, and I can't go into the details because I don't understand it. It's like reading Fermat's last theorem, it's completely over my head. But anyway, transmission capabilities, and talked about there is a way. And so I wanted to, we printed out those 8 or 10 pages, and I handed it out to all the councils that I managed to converse with who paid for, currently provide the transmission capability. So this is the sort of thing that we have a possibility to influence as ABC Friends as we come across this news and information. So that was something else. And lastly, what was I going to say? Yeah, and as an update production manager, I've had the great good fortune to get to know a lot more about people. I've written the stories for Update. It's not, Diana would prefer this was purely an academic paper. No, but that's the impression I had. My apologies. But anyway, Mel has always liked the occasional story, so I've always enjoyed meeting some of our amazing friends over the years, and just featuring, and one of the ones that I did was for Jackie Deacon up on the Gold Coast, because I met her on the way back down from a Zonta conference in Brisbane, and she sends out all our news items, which to everyone, for those that want to be on her circulation list. And what a fascinating woman she is. She's across everything. So we've got this mass of fantastic people with all different skill sets, and we exist to be that wonderful support for the ABC, to fight for the ABC. And we've got access to great sources of information now in the body of the ABC Friends. We've got good, I sort of say corporate knowledge, that's not quite right, but across our own planet, we've got all that. We've got, we stand on the shoulders like the Corin Fairbairn Bass that has been doing the, like the big march over the Harbour Bridge back in, was it 96? I think it was, wasn't it? We were away, I just know of it, and how many thousand people marched over the Harbour Bridge for the...
Huge.
Yeah, was it 20,000, I think? So it was a huge number. I remember John Hewson telling me he was one of them. I just remember that. But anyway, I wasn't in the country, but I know it was a huge number. So we've got that. We've got good, we're getting good credibility now. We had it, but we've got it better now. Because we've got close association with the alumni as well. We've got the benefit of, to use it, almost use the expression you use, but not quite nearly the same, collective action. Because we're not one-off. It's not just you going out in the street and talking to someone. You speak with authority because you're part of ABC Friends. We've got that authority now. We are contacted to ask questions. So that, I think that's a really powerful thing. It's little, but it's powerful, and it's happening a lot. And our members, we're implicitly part of this big group, and we've got that extra power. So I think it's fantastic. And I'd like to adjure everybody to do what I'm hoping over to do, and that's the famous Churchill expression, never give up on our ABC. Democracy depends on our ABC, and I really think that what we're doing is terribly important, and you all know that. I don't need to say, I'm preaching to the converted. Thank you.
Thank you. If you were going to say, what was some of the really, I feel like you've already told us what the highlights are, because that's been the topic of your talk, but what's been the best and the worst of times for the ABC in your view?
Of the ABC? Friends, I can't.
What about the ABC? What do you...
The way it's been choked back by, most of the Prime Ministers in the last 20 years. I mean, it's just been decimated. I mean, the efficiency dividend that somebody spoke about back in the mid-2010s, the money that's gone out of it, because they've hollowed out the back end. There's nobody there to help the reporters. There's nobody there to help television journalists. They've got to go and do it themselves. The librarians being, you were fighting that good fight.
Getting rid of the archivists,
The
getting rid of the
archivists, the
librarians.
librarians, exactly. It's appalling.
The senior staff in droves
And it isn't, yeah, it isn't until you hear about a country that hasn't got a public broadcaster anymore that you realise what the problem is. But once this is gone, it's gone for good. And the thing that the threat that holds up, that I'm hanging on to, there's an awful lot of threats in the world, but one that I hold on to is the BBC had a charter for 100 years. I'm not quite sure of the year of its establishment, but something like 1928, I think. And that 100 years is coming up, and those that don't want a public broadcaster are saying, trying to work out what they can do at the 100 years limit. And I suspect, and I don't know, but I'd love someone to find out and let me know this, or let us know it, is the ABC's charter for 100 years as well? Is there a threat to that for 2032? Do we have to worry about that? Because it is so in the BBC. And the forces that are against public broadcasting, definitely the knives are out, and they're doing what they can to try. So something's happening, and I worry about that, I must say. The good things, ABC, we're all devotees of the ABC. What more can I say? I can't speak of. I mean, I've loved some of the fabulous programs we've had over the years, and the radio, within Friends. The fact that we're now a national organisation, and that's taken a long time in the gestation, I think is a really fantastic achievement. You know, the usual story in all these organisations, personalities occasionally get in the way, but fantastic that we've now got a national organisation with just that much more influence, and it gives us that fantastic level of support for when we go out to speak. So that's, yeah, does that answer?
Angela, can you enlarge a bit on how it's possible to get new branches established, especially in isolation? The reason I ask this is that since the end of the 80s, my family and I used to go down to Jindabyne at least twice a year, and I'm very familiar with what broadcasting possibilities are like there from the listener's point of view. Very poor. But at some stage, I can't remember when, it must have been 25 or more, maybe longer, years ago, Kuma established a branch.
Did they, didn't
They did. And Bessie and I went down, and he was always asked to, when there was a new branch being started within a reasonable distance, he was always invited to go and open it officially. So I used to go too. And Kuma got started.
Yes.
And
That's news to me.
and where's it gone?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking is that I was down in Jindabyne last January, and I had some ABC Friends flyers, so I took them down with me. And I went into the library, a very new library in Jindabyne and in Kuma. So I went to both libraries, and I asked if I could leave some of these in the library. The one library was very ho-hum, didn't seem to bother too much or care, or even know what it was all about. So I did explain. The other library, Kuma, I think, was very, very keen. So I left some of these things, and I said that if they wanted any joining forms or to know more, then certainly to get in touch with us. I don't think they have. I mean, I haven't heard, but then I wouldn't anyway.
Yeah.
But there's a sort of how to get them wired up again.
You need the one person. The one person here that was here, key person of course is Janine for this branch, and others that are solidly in support. Yes, and that's what I found out. I like Jill Graham and Belinda and Trevor Wright put their hands up in the Southern Highlands. Barry and Bev Redshaw put their hands up in Western Suburbs. Carmel McCallum in Shoalhaven and South Coast, and then Diane Beckett down in the Sapphire Coast. Once you've got one person in that area, so it's not the head office, so to speak, then it makes it easy. Just need that one person And if this, and I don't know how we find, that's the question
That's
I can't
the problem.
answer.
How and where do
Well,
you find one
it's
person?
it probably is possible going on the membership, to do a search through the membership, which Susan could do. I've sent all of the documents that I developed for starting branches up to Bruce Stevenson, ready for his thing next in a couple of weeks. And I've got a track to run on there, so I've developed an agenda and, you know, all those sorts of things, the formal motions to start the branch. It's finding those first people, because once you've got those first two people, a couple of people, then I think it's easy enough to start sending messages out, because we've got the online capacity to do all this now, and write to the people that live in that area, usually by federal seat I prefer. Can be done by postcode, some are, but I think, Janine, you use federal seats, don't you?
Yeah.
For northern suburbs, yeah. And we do too, we're Hume and Whitlam, so, you know, come the last election, we obviously didn't bother campaigning a lot in Whitlam, but we campaigned an awful lot in Hume. Don't know how much we shifted things, but we tried. Anyway, but really, it is finding those first couple of people, and then we have now got that track to run on, that I believe we can support people that want, and because we've also got the opportunity of the great guest speakers. I mean, I'd initially lined up John Hewson to speak at the Shoalhaven one, and had to pull out because his wife was poorly that weekend. She's having an operation or something. So we ended up with the mayor down there, Heather something, I forgot her surname now. And she was great. But we packed over 100 people in there. And yeah, it's magic. You know, so once you get the energy and it starts, and we can do that. We can support them at the New South Wales and ACT level.
There's something obviously happened in Cooma because it just faded out.
Yeah, well, the ACT branch faded out. People just had been doing stuff for 20 odd years, and then they said, can't keep it up, so we absorbed the ACT, and I remember saying, I can't, buckling at the knees, having to type in 340 names into the database.
John.
No, I can't do that. Fortunately, we had someone that managed to absorb that all for me at the time, but yeah, that happens. And the Illawarra branch has faded at the moment, which is a shame, but there's somebody there that's interested to start it up again, so I'm keeping everything, I've got fingers and toes I've crossed to...
Perhaps getting in touch with both the library to see if there was any interest.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can follow
Yeah,
that up.
it would be worth it, wouldn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I hope that wasn't too long. Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
It's more a comment actually about the transmission. You talked about that. Now there's cuts in the ABC, as we all know, and they're cutting the high salary people like foreign the Canberra and Andrew Craven. My friend, colleague, ex-colleague, he will be in a month or so. He was looking after the transmission, and he was talking to the private contractors who were very reluctant to do any work, even though they're contracted to do it and are being paid to do it. So if anybody has any transmission problems, you've got to call the ABC straight away, because the person in there that has been doing all of this will not be there. We're not there now. So the transmission problems will get worse because the private contractor couldn't care less, even though they've got the contract. And they're being paid for it instead.
Exactly.
He's been doing this job for the last 10 or 15 years. And it's been a constant job to get onto these contractors to do their job. It's quite incredible. Since John Howard took it away from the ABC, he set up
That's right.
It's been an absolute disaster. But fortunately, it doesn't affect us in the city so much, but it does in Goulburn and all those other areas.
Well, yes, and go on, Diane.
Oh,
Same topic.
to carry on from what you're saying, ABC Friends is not only sort of, we say things to give ABC a prod from time to time, and also the government a prod from time to time. And in this current newsletter, which should be in your read box, it's online version, should be in your mail very shortly, we reproduced the original press release
In control, yes.
19th of December 2018, that Labor would restore shortwave. And we say, you promised, now you should do it.
Yeah. yeah, I don't know what's going to come out of all of that. I can get you the document that I handed out to the LGA if you'd like, because I've got a soft copy on my computer, I'm pretty sure. I can send you that.
Okay.
And Sue Pinnock would put you in touch with the chap that came up with a new concept for, and it is a new concept, for transmission across the whole of Australia. Because that shortwave issue that you've spoken about is, Mal spoke at the winter dinner.
Yes.
Sorry, Janine, I haven't talked about what you said about the winter dinner, I'll come back to that. But that was the big issue. According to Jason, you all know Jason Lowe, he was saying that it used to cost, I believe, about $4 million a year to run the shortwave transmission all around Australia and into Papua New Guinea, southern parts of Indonesia and other islands in the South Pacific, and across to the foot of India, I think it was as big as that. And that was why it reached all of the Territorians, all the Northern Territory people in Northern Western Australia get almost nothing now. And that was his question at the winter dinner. I asked Michelle Rowland, so she's well aware of it. It's something that you could easily put in your submission to ask for, because the digital world does not solve all those problems. And as you probably all know, a certain very large country to the north of us, after we were forced to abandon in Julie Bishop's time the shortwave that we were no longer going to sustain and maintain. Every single one of those bands was picked up by that other country, and they now broadcast in English to this part of the Pacific, which is, not ideal from our perspective. Anyway, and I was going to say something about winter dinner. What was the thing about winter dinner you asked me, Mr. Wells? What was I going to comment on? Sorry. Oh, about the review, the submissions? Yeah, just encouraging everybody to do that, to please make a submission. It really doesn't matter how short, but you could probably mention it in a submission to say proper funding for the ABC, put back what was taken out, those hundreds of millions that were taken out over the last decade, and give it a chance to be the beast that it ought to be. It isn't a beast, sorry.
Angela, Lindsay, do we know if the promise was to reinstate the shortwave, or if they had another idea? Like, what are the Chinese broadcasting in, for instance?
That's what they're using, the old shortwave. The shortwave bands,
Okay.
all the ones because they are a limited number, and when they were relinquished, they were taken up by.
Well, fair enough. I mean, anyone could see that. And the islanders themselves miss the ABC, I believe.
Yes, well, Sean Dorney was a perfect example of that. He
Yeah.
spoke about that quite often in his interviews.
Yeah.
That's the
I
side.
think any more questions?
Can I say
Yes,
something positive, please, John?
Yeah.
Margaret Mead, said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has.
Correct.
And I take a lot of heart from that with various, especially with the Friends of the ABC.
Yes,
Yep.
I agree.
Yeah, they said 6 people around the kitchen table is enough to change the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of the
And
above.
also similarly, they say 6 people, it only takes 6 people to get a huge airfield built. To make the movement to convince people that an airfield is necessary. Only takes 6.
Committed and passionate, as we all are.
That's the point.
Very good.
Karen, we'd like you to thank Angela for that one.
Thank you. Both feet. Both. Right. I'll come to those in a minute.
We've got feet.
Yeah. I just disgraced myself by falling over the engineering. Thank you, Angela. It's great.
That's a bit fragile too, don't lean on.
I won't lean on the tower. Okay.
Yeah, I do.
All right. An overview like Angela's is something that I've always needed. I might have been there when the idea of the Friends of the ABC was born. I was a sort of midwife. I wasn't responsible for the idea.
You just caught the baby.
Well, I supported the instigator. So I've dropped over the years since then. I've dropped in and out on the committee. and spent some time looking after him while he was unable to carry on. But I've always been part of the Friends of the ABC. But to have an overview is something that I really needed myself, because dipping in and out like that, and I've always been more on the fringes and the committee supporter rather than being active. But one thing I would like to suggest is, in a submission, is to have something, children. No mention of programs for children. And that, I think, is that the ABC children's programs over the years have been of vital importance, not only for the children as the young ones who are watching, but to start developing a future audience and supporters of the ABC. And I think children, we have to begin as young as possible. I mean, Blue, for instance, children will never forget Blue, even if they've gone beyond and get older. They will know what the ABC can do, and it's important. I must tell you that Angela and I have a lot in common, don't we?
Yes, we do, Robert. We've discovered.
We were both born in England, grew up and lived in New Zealand. We're New Zealanders with that background. Then we came to, I didn't know her, not at all. No. I'm a little bit older than she is anyway. Then
You're as old as the ABC.
I am, but don't say so. It's only
We all know, Corinne.
I don't care. It's only what's written on paper anyway. Then we both came to live in Australia, in Sydney. I still didn't know her. She came to live in Taramara, or very close to us. I still didn't know her. and so it goes on and on.
And music.
And music, we're both musicians by training. Anyway, so thank you anyway.
How did you meet? How did you meet?
Through this.
Through the
When I first spoke to Corinne when I rang up to interview Bassy, before you interviewed him, I think you interviewed him the second time. Yeah, I interviewed him back in, but it was only over the phone.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember him.
See, the Friends of the ABC have been responsible for all sorts of things. And it's great to be amongst like-minded people.
Oh, here.
Isn't it?
Here, absolutely.
I'll just tell you I think it's a very funny story. But nothing to do with the Friends of the ABC or friendships or anything. Do you remember Jeffrey Whitehead?
Yeah.
Well, he was the general manager of the Friends of the ABC, but he left sooner than his contract, before his contract was up, that's right.
On the ABC, yeah.
He was managing director of the ABC, not ABC Friends.
Yes.
Sorry, did I say Friends?
Yes.
I mean, he was the general manager of the
Wishful
Friends
thinking.
of the ABC. And that was many years ago. And Bassy was at that stage, my husband, was at that stage the president of the Friends of the ABC, the only president, I think, until other branches got going. And he and Jeffrey Whitehead had a few stoushes, as my husband tended to do with ABC people who were running it. Anyway, they were not, I think, the best of friends. Anyway, Jeffrey Whitehead left before his contract was up, and he went to New Zealand, and he got a job there. He got a job in the equivalent of the National Trust, the Australian National Trust. It's called the Heritage Places, or Heritage, sorry, I can't remember. But the head of it was my sister. Jeffrey Whitehead had no idea that his boss was Walter Bass's sister-in-law. She never said, and I never said anything here either. All this is long ago.
Yeah.
But there were some very funny stories at the time. My sister enjoyed the situation. Anyway, I've never really told anybody, but you're the first. Now it's all over and long ago.
Yes,